welcome back to our podcast. This is Samyukta, and I was also the host for our episode on Dharma and feminism, which you should totally check out after this one. Today I'm joined by my East Coast Tange, Arushi.
Thanks for that intro, West Coast Akka. And if you haven't listened to the intro Carnatic music, you can see why we're both kind of nerding out over South Indian languages. But today we are going to be discussing Kashmiri Hindu heritage in our episode.
Mm-hmm. So some of you may be a little bit confused or lost. What does Hindu history have to do with Kashmir? But what you may not know is that the indigenous culture of Kashmir is Hindu, and that this episode aims to highlight the culture and experiences of a Hindu community that has unfortunately been through countless exoduses.
Our aim is to normalize conversation about Kashmiri Hindu experiences without tokenizing the trauma or whitewashing history.
So Arushi, I think we should give a brief overview of some key points on Kashmiri culture before we introduce today's guest.
So, if I remember correctly, obviously our guests are going to give a lot more insight, but to give a quick overview, the biggest school of Hindu thought in Kashmir is Kashmiri Shaivism, and some of these traditions and practices are things that you may have noticed before, or ideas you may have heard before. So it developed between the 8th and the 12th centuries. And it uses the traditional Advaita philosophy, or one of the early interpretation of the Vedas, as a basis. So it says that the Atma and the eternal Brahman are one and the same. And based on the name Shaivism, it personifies Brahman through Shiva.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And some well-known Kashmiri Shiva thinkers include Lal Ded and Abhinava Gupta.
I remember Lal Ded, that you mentioned her in the feminism episode already. So she's, if I'm not mistaken, she's one of the most famous female Kashmiri poets, and some even refer to her as an avatar of Shiva.
Yes, exactly. She composed many poems, and I've heard that the Kashmiri language is rich with her sayings. And while we're on the topic of arts, another scholar, Abhinava Gupta, wrote a well-known commentary on the Natya Shastra called Samyuktha and Ratnakara, which talks about drama, music, and various dance traditions.
So if you're a classical dancer, as many Hindus are, Abhinava Gupta's writings are actually one of the foundations of classical dance theory. I remember learning about the Sangeeta Ratnakara in my Kuchipudi class, actually. And he also wrote the Saiva Darshana, a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, and his Sangeeta Ratnakara is a commentary on Natya Shastra, Bharata Muni's original book on Hindu dance drama traditions.
Amazing. And these two people are from Kashmir. They highlight the Kashmiri Hindu heritage. So I think you guys get an idea of just how rich this culture is, and we've barely scraped the surface. So now let's take a deep dive into it.
It's my absolute pleasure to introduce our guests for this episode, Meera and Ahan. Thank you so much for joining us today. Do you mind introducing yourselves to our listeners? Meera, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Meera Bhat. I am a Kashmiri Pandit. And just a little bit about me. I'm right now a senior in high school. I used to live in the Bay Area, so near Samyukta. But now I live in Dubai, so I'm just having both sides of the world on that. But I'm really excited to talk a little bit about Kashmiri history and Kashmiri culture with you guys.
And hello, everyone. I'm Ahan. I am currently a first year at the University of Chicago, hoping to study economics and law letters in society. But my hometown is the great town of Montgomery Township in New Jersey. And yes, I'm also Kashmiri Pandit. My entire family on both sides is from Srinagar, which is the capital of Kashmir. And yeah, I'm very, very excited for this opportunity to talk and also learn a lot about my culture.
Amazing. Glad to have you both here. Our first question for you guys is, what's your favorite or most cherished thing about your Kashmiri heritage?
I can definitely go first with that. I truly believe for us, we're a fairly small community, but that makes it even better because each of our traditions is so unique to all of us, and it's so much more cherished after all of the history that we've gone through for the past several centuries. I feel that everything about our Kashmiri heritage, all the culture, the traditions, it's so richly ingrained in the rest of the Indian subcontinent. And everything that we've learned through there is even more richly ingrained in our religion of Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma. And I believe that there's so much in Kashmir that we've carried throughout the world. And since it's so comprehensively practiced throughout the world, and all of our smaller traditions, from even a big Shivratri pujas that we have every year to some of the amazing dishes that we'll have like mutts and rogan josh, but everything like that is just so deeply ingrained in our culture. And everyone, whether we're in Kashmir or not, we so wholly believe in it and practice it and just carry that tradition with us. And I truly feel that that's something that we all just celebrate wherever we are in the world. And Kashmiri Pandits truly do come together whenever we do get a chance to see each other over these small things and even big things in our culture. So I truly, truly value that in our heritage and culture.
Yeah, so I guess maybe starting on the more superficial, I definitely have to agree with Meera that our cuisine is amazing. Mutts and Rogan Josh and Goshtaba and all that sort of stuff is just, it's the best, right? I love our cuisine. But I guess more deeper than that. I think it's kind of bittersweet because it it is caused by a lot of tragic events in history, but I think there's a solidarity to the Kashmiri Pandit community, which comes from the fact of um, being kicked out of your homeland and being in a diaspora and still trying to maintain what culture you can maintain, like maintaining the language, which was very, very unique. And because Kashmiri is very interesting as a language because um, obviously it's sort of like it's not as much like Hindi as you might imagine, right? Like there's a lot of the dialects or languages within North India, like Punjabi or as I understand Marathi, though I don't really know that much about it. Bengali too, for sure, are like very very similar to Hindi, right? In fact, like if you know Hindi, you can probably understand Punjabi pretty well. But with the Kashmiri language, it's like very very unique. And so like just little things like that which have to be treasured, this very different take on religion, and yes, the fact that we don't take it for granted because we know what it means for it to be taken away and existentially threatened creates like a very strong sense of community. I felt growing up in America around other Kashmiri Pandits, like a real sense of bonding and community because it isn't guaranteed that like this culture is going to maintain unless we put work into it.
Completely agree. Yeah, definitely. It's something we all definitely do not take for granted. We know the stories of everything that's happened to us for so long. It's so tragic, and it's something that every Kashmiri Pandit knows very well, and we keep that so close to our heart. So like Ahan was saying, even when we get the chance to meet each other or just talk, we're so connected by that because we just know how preciously special it is, our culture and our heritage is to us, and everything from the superficial elements to it to even just how ingrained our religion and our language is with our culture. It's something that we all just continue to try practicing and carrying on wherever we are in the world, especially in America as well, that I found.
Thank you so much for that beautiful insight. That was actually truly beautiful to listen to. And I think some of us will have to take notes on kind of, I guess, being proud of our culture. Obviously, in a diaspora, it's hard for everyone, but we definitely kind of need to preserve that. And kind of going into, leaning into that conversation you guys had, what is one fact about Kashmiri Hindu culture that people may not know? You guys already talked about a bunch of super interesting things, but what's something that you would like people to know, or do you think is like the best part?
Yeah, so I think this ties directly into what Ahan was saying earlier, but the language of the Kashmiri Pandit people, what we speak, it's so interesting to really go into the history of that. Because one interesting fact that I find, at least, is the written script that we write in, it's actually a lost language that a lot of Kashmiris themselves don't know, regardless of religion. But even Kashmiri Pandits, we're trying to preserve it the best we can. But the written script that we do use is a script called Sharda. It's after our goddess Sharda, who some people who might be more familiar with Saraswati, goddess of learning. So it's directly kind of brought and inherited from that. But it's a very holy language that's been used for, I would say, 1,000 years, probably several centuries at least. And it's something where if you really go into the history of Kashmir, especially the spoken language of Kashmir, which is so different from anything else that's truly in India. So it definitely does derive elements from kind of what Ahan was alluding to earlier. It was deriving elements from languages like Farsi, from Urdu, from Hindi, from Punjabi. It's all kind of a nice conglomerate of all of those different languages. But when you really get down to the written script of it, it's this ancient script called Sharda that I really believe that Kashmiri Hindus, Kashmiri Pandits, we're trying to preserve the best that we can so that we can use it still in our culture and our religious tradition. So I truly find that it's so interesting to learn about that script and how, even though it's been kind of a lost script that not many people know, there are some people who are Kashmiri Pandits that are trying to preserve that and use that for years to come as well.
Yeah. I think for me personally, something which I think, first of all, surprises me at times, and second, I think should be emphasized more is, and I think especially in light of all the conflict and like the recent history we've had, is actually how truly multicultural Kashmir was. It's like my mom talks about this a lot growing up in Srinagar, of like she went to school at like a Catholic convent school. She, was Hindu. Her neighbors and tenants, like some of her like best friends and neighbors, were Sikh. And like you grew up with Muslims as, your best friends, as your family friends, right? Like it was common culture in Srinagar. Like if it was Eid, the Hindus went and celebrated with their Muslim friends. When it was Shivratri, Herath, Holi, Muslims would celebrate with you, and every other religion. And so I think because recently all this conflict has become tied up with a lot of like identity politics, I think that's kind of one of the true tragedies, is that in all this, is that it became about identity, when the thing, that sort of utopia which my parents, I'm not going to call it utopia, but like that great idealistic childhood which my parents grew up in, was actually about a kind of multiculturalism, right? Like from my mom, I derive a lot of love and appreciation for Sufi culture, which was big in Kashmir, and just to kind of fill people in, Sufism is, it's complicated, but it's sort of like a school of thought in Islam, which is more about kind of getting closer to God through private, like it's almost more, it's in a sense sort of like a fusion between Islam and Hinduism, in that Hinduism has a lot about like detachment and focus internally, meditating on being one with the Brahman. And so it's very similar to Sufism in that way of like getting closer to God through, I know what the word is, but like,
yeah, just like a reflection and, being there, even it's musically, there's just a lot of connection with God or that type of energy. So yeah, I totally understand that kind of connection between, Islam and Hindu religions and the practices that we hold. But yeah, please go ahead. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So like, I think that's just a perfect demonstration of how it was major in Kashmiri culture. Like the songs, like Sufi music is my favorite genre of music by far. The ghazals, which people would listen to, Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims. And so, yeah, I think that's just the main point, which I think needs to be hammered in more, is that like what that vision was isn't just about like, oh, Kashmiri Pandits, like, it's rightful homeland. It's about like a sort of multiculturalism, which was really the beautiful thing about living in Srinagar.
Yeah, I find myself like vigorously nodding along with what Ahan's saying, because I 1,000% agree. same exact thing. My entire family, mom, dad's side, everyone is completely from Kashmir, Srinagar, as well as many other places in Kashmir, Anantnag, Hal. But it's truly about that kind of multiculturalism, whether it's religions, whether it's ethnicities, whatever it is. It was so vibrant and present in Kashmir. And any Kashmiri Pandit, even though we're kind of younger compared to most Kashmiri Pandits out there, but we've even heard from our parents, our like Nana Nani, Dada Dadi, our grandparents, everyone around us. I like find myself so agreeing because even my mom is really also passed on that love for Sufi music, where it's something where it's such a reflection that we 100 years ago or even further back than that, we used to love each other's religions and cultures and be around each other, where people, regardless of their religion, Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, Sikhs, anyone, we would be together, we would celebrate with each other. And that kind of multiculturalism that's there. Sure, Hinduism might be kind of like the original religion or presence that was there, Hinduism and Buddhism, but even since then it really merged into something where all religions and peoples were accepted there. And it's just truly tragic to see kind of the political situation that's been happening there recently, because that's truly changed that reflection of what's there. And if anything should be taken away, it's really that kind of multiculturalism and love for each other that was so vibrant and present in Kashmir, wherever you were in Kashmir. That's something that I truly believe that any Kashmiri person really wants to preserve and go back to that sort of state. I find myself, I try to speak as much as I can on the Kashmir situation, whether it's history or politics or whatever. But whenever I get the chance to see or talk to someone who may be Kashmiri, but they're not Kashmiri Hindu, I've talked to so many people who are Kashmiri Sikhs, Kashmiri Buddhists, Kashmiri Muslims, and it's just so amazing to talk with them one-on-one, because you really see that sort of love for Kashmiri culture and the people there over any sort of hatred or identity politics that currently go on there. And I think that sort of one-on-one, relationship and culture that we have, I think that's just, it really should be emphasized. So thank you, Han, for bringing that up, because I definitely do agree with that one. That's just such a beautiful thing about Kashmir as well.
I love both of your points about multiculturalism and I guess like appreciating each other's music forms and other like forms of culture. It sounds like syncretism between both of what you believe in, and it's really beautiful. And speaking of connection, what historical or present day figures are you connected to on either a personal level, them personally, or do you just look up to, and why?
I don't know. I've been going first, so if Ahan wants to go first, you can go ahead.
Yeah, this is a tough question, especially because like it's tough to separate like people in your family who you look up to, and then like just I guess the Kashmiri Pandit movement in general. But like, yeah, I would say, I mean, obviously, I look up to all my family, so that like when if any of them watched it, I look up to you. Don't worry, I'm not, so that no one feels left out. But I guess maybe one example might be my great grandfather. He his name was N.C. Bali. I think it's Naresh Chandra Bali. And he worked on like he was just very, very well read. Like I've like a lot of memories when I was very, very young of like he lived in Jammu. Like most of my extended family like moved to Jammu after the events in 1990, and he was just very, very well read. He had these very like nice Hindu books. I have his copy of the Upanishads at home, and also like very well read on like political issues and stuff. And like when I was young, like thinking I knew something, I would try to have these discussions with him, and he would oblige me, and all that sort of stuff. So like just like that notion of being well educated, of learning, being politically involved. He was very active in like labor movements for people in Srinagar. So like just being politically involved, standing up for your community, and also like he was a Kashmiri Pandit, but like he had his Gita and his Upanishads, but he also had like books about like Islam and Christianity and stuff. And so like not just embracing your identity, but also embracing other cultures and learning about other cultures, which I think is a very important point. Yeah, I guess on Kashmiri Pandit things more generally, I think the other person I might mention or shout out is um, uh, a man, Rakesh Cole Sr., who I know him because he's kind of in our. I don't know if we'll talk about KOA later, the Kashmiri Overseas Association, but he's like in the same zone as me. I think he lives in New Jersey. I might be wrong about that. Sorry to him if you're watching. If I get it wrong, but he's just like in our zone. He's just like a very very educated scholar about Kashmiri Pandit history. He wrote a book called Kotarani about Kashmiri Pandit princess in medieval Kashmir. Like he wrote a novel about it. I would recommend that book to you all if you want to know more about Kashmiri Pandit culture. But I think one of the most amazing things is that he never actually lived in Kashmir. He's Kashmiri Pandit, but I think I'm just going to be. I think he grew up in Delhi. I might be wrong though. But even besides never having grown up in Kashmir, the kind of responsibility he takes for learning about his culture, learning about his theology, learning about the history, and like this isn't just like he does serious scholarly research. This is a major hobby of his, right? Like uncovering information which wasn't like there before. Like I might be going on a tangent, but like he once during an event he talked about his book, right? And he was like, you may have noticed that like there's a scene in the book where like they're having a feast, and there isn't a Kashmiri dish called dum aloo there. Dum aloo is like it's like you take potatoes and like it's like it's very
Best
spicy and
dish.
like
It's so good. Yeah.
yes, you cook it until
It's
like
basically just
the
alus,
juice
like
goes.
potatoes that are just so nicely cooked. They're like fried and they're spicy. They're so good. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he pointed that out. And he's like, you may have noticed dum aloo wasn't on the table. And then he explained the history of how potatoes entered like the Kashmir Valley, right? It's like that level of detail. And so I also find that inspiring of in terms of how to maintain and look into your culture, even if like, because I obviously don't have any memories of Srinagar. I was never there. But there is something which still holds you to that place, which is like the community around you.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely have to agree. My family, I've just found so much has been happening with over the past years that I've truly learned about it. My family has definitely been people who I admire, who I look up to, because they've really, despite us not being in Kashmir any longer, my family's always been one who've been very active with Kashmir and helping out the cause and just carrying on that culture and that heritage. And I truly look up to them as being people who definitely are helping to preserve the culture and heritage. Just like, for example, in my mind, I just go straight to my Nana right now, my mom's dad. And he and we've been working to kind of just set up an ashram and help this hospital that is supposed to be helping Kashmir refugees in Jammu, because it's devastating how even 30 plus years after we've been kicked out from Kashmir, there are so many refugees from Kashmir who continue to live in absolutely horrific conditions in Jammu and who don't receive access to the stuff that they need, including medical needs. And I especially just find it's so it's more than helpful. It's just something where both when my like Nana and I can go and raise funds for the hospital that's there and really just help kind of connect that culture with what we have right now and helping to provide for our community. That's something that I just know I'm going to have those memories for so long. And it's something where I just really appreciate because I know even though we don't have our homeland back and we aren't able to visit, my family being fortunate enough to live in both the US and now in Dubai, we have those sort of privileges that we can go and help our community with. And so being able to then send over funds that I've raised myself by just tutoring kids and send that over and see that help building hospitals that help those Kashmiri refugees in Jammu, that's just something that's so deeply personal to me and just something where I personally just look up to so much. So that's just on a family level. That's just one thing out of so many things. But really, every Kashmiri Pandit family has something like that where they're doing something to help preserve their culture and give back to the community as a whole. Another thing I'd like to shout out, this is kind of family related as well. She's like a distant relative on my mom's side, I believe. But this amazing journalist, Arthi Tikku Singh, she has been so amazing in just kind of advocating for Kashmiri culture, but even more than that, Kashmiri Pandit culture. And I'm not personally, I haven't met her. And even though she is in my family, it's kind of like an Indian family thing where there's just so many people in your family, you never have a chance to meet everyone. But I've been so inspired by like all the stuff that she's doing to really just advocate for us Kashmiri Pandits, even going in Congress in a hearing and really just despite what she faced there, and she faced a lot of gaslighting there, she really just pushed for our cause amongst all else and just really created so much advocacy for everything. And as a journalist who's Indian, who's Kashmiri, and raising advocacy for our causes, I personally just look up to that so much. And I truly believe a lot of Kashmiris do appreciate any time that when we're in the news, when we really get to talk about not just the political side of what's going on, but also just our heritage and our people. Because I truly believe that Kashmiri Pandits were not talked about as much as honestly we should be, and as much as we should be advocated for. And so at any time when I can see that Kashmiri representation, I truly appreciate it, at least. So I definitely would just kind of shout out on the personal level, family, but even more than that, just people who can go out there and show that Kashmiri representation and advocacy. So yeah, definitely.
That's amazing. I think I've heard of Aditi. So what's her name?
Arthi.
Arthi, right. Arthi Tikku. I watched her Congress hearing thing. It was, yes. I think Ilhan Omar was there too, right?
Yes. She definitely gaslighted a lot, which was frustrating to see, because you want to see people who most of America knows of. You want to really see and hope that those people can give us representation. But in the end, any opportunity where we can just get our issues out there and talk about our people, I think that's just the most beneficial at all. So yeah, she's definitely been so amazing in helping us.
So true. Yeah. So I like stan her. She's amazing. But yeah. Next question.
So kind of circling back to, I remember Ahan was referencing like the places that he felt connected to in Kashmir. So on that note, what are some places in Kashmir that you would love to visit?
Okay, I can go. I think kind of also what Ahan's mentioning, Srinagar is it's the capital, but it's such a big place. I personally, in Kashmir, the places I truly want to go to are places where it was my family's home, and my family is from a good amount of places in Kashmir. So I'd love to see places like Srinagar. I'd love to go to my mom's side and see Anantnag. I'd love to see Hal, which is on my dad's side. I'd love to see so many of those places where truly, my dad's side is very fortunate that their family home is actually one of the only homes left that are actually being preserved and stayed up there. Unfortunately, when in 1990 we got kicked out, many of the Kashmiri Pandits' homes were burnt down, and it's these beautiful, beautiful homes. I really wish I could go back, but in these beautiful, beautiful homes where there are orchards in the backyards and grand homes that are almost even mansions, but those beautiful family homes all over Kashmir. My dad was fortunate enough that he recently found out that his family home is still there, and it's been preserved from that condition. It's just us not being able to go see it. So in any case, I would love to see that home, and to really just go and see all of those family places where my parents grew up in and my family grew up in. And even from there, just going and seeing kind of just like their schools or their local temples or anything like that where they've grown up and had their childhood in. I would absolutely love more than anything else to be able to go there safely and to see that. So that's something that's really personal to me, but I definitely would love to go see those places.
Yeah, I definitely agree that for me, it's probably most about seeing how my family lived. And so like both my mom and dad's side, like we don't come from like a village in Kashmir and then like they lived in Srinagar, like they were always in Srinagar. So for me personally, it would probably be mostly concentrated in the city. So visiting the specific neighborhoods my parents were from. So Natipura and Jawaharnagar. I think are my dad and mom's neighborhoods respectively in Srinagar. And so yeah, just like I mean, it's tough. It would probably be bittersweet because it's highly unlikely that their houses are still there and in the same condition they were when obviously they lived in them. And uh, obviously, if I were to visit Kashmir, I'd love to do it with my parents because I mean, first of all, I wouldn't know my way around. I wouldn't really know what I'm looking at, but also kind of the catharsis and the closure of them being able to go back there, I think would be an important aspect of it. And so I think it's tough contemplating like, yes, I would want to go because, seeing my homeland, seeing, my origins, but also like when you go there, it is not going to be the same place. And so kind of reconciling those things. But yeah, besides that, things like I'd love to visit the Dal Lake, go to the Charchinar Island, it's just beautiful there. And you see it in the Bollywood songs all the time too. Places like Gulmarg and Pahalgam, which are just like extremely beautiful. Being able to drink water from Jhelum, directly with my hands and skiing, even though I don't even know how to ski, but I'll ski if I can go to Pahalgam. And so, yeah, it's a combination of sort of a personal history reckoning of seeing how my parents lived and where they lived and what life was like. But also just like Kashmir is a beautiful place, and I want to go to beautiful places like Pahalgam and Gulmarg and experience that as well.
I love that. Yeah, I've never heard of any of these places, but when I listen to this again, I will like write them down. And the next time it's safe and we go to India, then I'll go there. And I think now that we talked so much about who you look up to and things that you love, let's transition to a little bit of that we're Hindu Americans, right? So, are there any remarks, comments, or weird questions you get from both like Hindus and non-Hindus, from Indians and non-Indians, you get when people discover your background and from when you're Kashmiri?
I think there's kind of two sides of it, or actually almost three. One, there's the people who don't really know what Kashmir is, which honestly is fun for me because I get to talk to them about the stuff that I really love about it. So that's my culture and my heritage, not really the political stuff, but really just the stuff that I truly love about my heritage and my culture. And I just get to kind of educate them on what happens and kind of just how we've carried on and preserved our culture and all the traditions that we have. So that's in the case when they don't really know what Kashmir is or anything about Kashmiri Hindus. Then there's a side of people who I think unfortunately are kind of just been biased by some of the recent stuff that's been happening in the news. And it's really unfortunate to kind of get I wouldn't say hate, but I would say, just some comments that you can really tell that they're misinformed about it, unfortunately, and they just really don't know. And those conversations are kind of tough because it's people who don't really know about your tradition, how beautiful your culture is, but they're so ready to speak on kind of the political side of things. And I mentioned earlier, I try to be as active as I can on both my heritage and speaking out about that, but also kind of the political stuff that's been going on as well. So honestly, what I try to do the best that I can is just to explain my side of it. A lot of people haven't heard of Kashmiri Hindus and Pandits, which is really unfortunate, but any chance I can to just explain our history, really the tragedies we faced over the past around 7 centuries, and how we continue to preserve our culture, even though we're now widespread across the world. Any chance that I can get to just explain that to people, even if they don't make the best of comments or don't have the best of knowledge on the situation, I find at the end of that conversation, in most cases, probably 90% of the time, they walk away at least appreciative that they know something new about it. And whether I completely change their mind or not, it's just a new chance for them to gain a better perspective on it. And then I truly believe like the other side of it would be just kind of people who know a lot about Kashmiri Hindus and just kind of like are asking questions that like, when will you go back, or have you ever been there, or they really just know about the traditions and the culture that's there. And honestly, that kind of enthusiasm I truly love. It's something where it's like Ahan was saying, it's really bittersweet because we don't really know, one, if we will be able to go back safely. Some people do go back, but it's just kind of a scary situation overall for Hindus who are Kashmiri. But even more than that, it's a situation where any chance that we can, we really want to talk about what we faced and kind of just the bittersweet emotions we have. Because even if we do get the chance to go back, it's like, would you want to go back to a place that's completely foreign to you? Over the past 30 years, it's been changed from everything that you've known. And something for at least my family and my extended family, that's just a question that we kind of grapple with is, do we want to go back to a place where it's just so completely different and we've gone through so much, both our childhood and our history, but also so much trauma and tragedy. So it's stuff like that where whenever we meet people who are kind of enthusiastic about Kashmiri Hindu heritage and culture, I'd say both of you guys as well, Samyukta, both of you guys also being really enthusiastic about it. I think for me personally, it's just so fun to talk about it and to really learn about all that's going on, and just overall just to be able to share as much as we can about our culture and our heritage and kind of the emotions and history we've gone through and what we're facing. So, I mean, personally, I've had so many, like a wide range of comments that have been addressed to me, but in any case that I can to just talk about our culture and our heritage, I think that's just like the best conversation that I personally feel that I can have with someone else.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of Meera in thanking Arushi and Samyukta because even like the little bit like you guys mentioned like the 5 minutes in the beginning actually taught me a lot which I didn't know about Kashmiri culture, which was great because and I think like there's so much I don't know. Like I really don't know that much, to be honest with you. Like I was actually worried like before the as like we were coming up to recording this of like I don't think I know anything about my culture. So I think recognizing that it's a learning process and like knowing that I'll never know everything, but just trying my best to keep learning a bit more every day. I think that's part of the process for me. And thank you guys for helping to enable that. But yeah, in terms of this question specifically, yeah, I think kind of as Meera said as well, the problem usually isn't that like people say vindictive things or that like they say like discriminatory things as much as like they just don't know who we are, which I think is the main problem. And I think we can like this is something we might get to in like later questions, which might be more directly about like the political situation, but it's more that like when people, especially now that because of the sort of wave of social media, Instagram activism, which we've been getting the last year or so, where like an international problem somehow through some account like gets spread to like a large audience in America of mostly teenagers who have no context whatsoever on the problem and yet have already formed normative opinions about exactly who's right and exactly who's wrong. When that happens, it's just like often we're just not there. Like I shared this on an Instagram story of mine where there was a infographic people were sharing about which was comparing the Israel-Palestine conflict with the Kashmir situation, and like there was a timeline on it, and just first noting, and I noted this in the story of like I don't really have normative judgments about Kashmir actually. Like you know it might seem like I would have particular judgments about it, but I honestly feel like I know nothing. And so even though I have a sort of cultural heritage, ethnic stake in it, I guess you could say, I kind of keep myself away from a normative opinion. But like just in terms of like the facts, they had timelines. And the timeline for Kashmir said nothing about Kashmiri Pandits, right? It had something in the 1970s, then had something in the 2000s. And I was like, wait, did you forget about 1990 when like thousands and thousands of Kashmiri Pandits were either kicked out or killed, right? Some brutally, because of, whatever was causing it, right? And so I think that's the main thing, is just ignorance. And I think it's important because I understand that infographic was trying to drive a particular message. But there's a responsibility when like there are thousands of people who, like in America, who are politically active and progressive, for who this is the only information they're getting about this region. They probably didn't even know that Kashmir existed before this. And so, yeah, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that kind of the main peculiar thing about my background in terms of when I hear people talk about it isn't necessarily that like when I mention being Kashmiri Pandit to people that like they find it weird. That doesn't really happen. In fact, it's often like an interesting starting point for conversation, but rather that like people just don't know. And there are ways in which willful ignorance is happening as well. I think the connection to Arthi Tikku's testimony was relevant here as well.
I love that. Like our willful ignorance it really, really pertains to what you're talking about, I think. And I think in my situation, when I hear about Kashmiri culture, I tend to think about the political stuff that's going on much, much more than, your actual culture. And that kind of makes me sad in a way because, your culture is so rich. It's so beautiful. And the fact that I only think about politics, it just makes me really sad. So I think I'll think about that in the future.
I just kind of like to go to Ahan's point on like the Instagram like activism, right? Like even I like saw like there was such a silence. Like I was just like, where are you guys? Like why is no one talking? Like why is like I would just like you I cannot imagine, being in that position. But honestly I kind of hope that see the Instagram whirlwind has its like pros and cons, but I hope that that people start to know what your beautiful culture is and like what you guys have been through, and that hopefully the Hindu community can have a bit more cohesion, a bit more assertiveness, along with respect, and just kind of come together for those who have been through so much, but also like Samyuktha said, like try not to tokenize it or disessentialize it. So yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely love to add on to that. I mean, I'm pretty active on Instagram when it comes to these things. I've said so many times that there are so many misinformed infographics, especially on Instagram and platforms like that, where I've seen the exact one that Ahan was talking about, the Palestine versus Israel, and then just comparing that sort of timeline, which was so falsely created against Kashmir. If people aren't going to share the fact that there are centuries upon centuries, honestly, 7 centuries worth of conflict, 7 genocides that Kashmiri Pandits at least have just gone through. If people aren't even willing to share that as mass information on Instagram, it's just so hard for our community to be recognized in the first place. And it's stuff like that where it's very frustrating, because if we are going to then go into a conversation about either the political side or just, the genocidal tragedies that have happened over the course of the past century, then we better be willing to start talking about the history of conflict and tragedy and trauma that's been happening to all of the communities that are there. And I think that's what I was mentioning earlier. It's so important to have Kashmiri representation or Kashmiri voices in those cases, because if we don't talk about Kashmiri people, and if we don't let Kashmiri people have those voices to say what the true facts and figures are, as well as the history that's there, there's almost no chance that we're really going to get our story out there and be able to just, truly talk about what's happening. So I completely 100% agree that in most cases, it's never people who are ready to be discriminatory or vile towards us Kashmiris. It's most people who are in this day and age just misinformed by the sort of Instagram infographics that are going on and have been being passed around. And I think in any case, for anyone who's listening to this, if you do know of any Kashmiri or anyone who truly is informed on the topic and is willing to talk about it, please just listen to them and just hear their voices. And if even more than that, if you don't know anyone who is Kashmiri directly, just be ready to go on the internet and just do that research. It's something that both our heritage and our culture, as well as the history we've gone through, it's something that's so detailed and comprehensive. And just spending that 30 minutes to an hour, I've told so many people this, just spending 30 minutes to an hour on the internet, really looking at well-researched articles and journals and research that's come out by people who are especially Kashmiri scholars, like what Ahan was mentioning earlier, I think his name was Rakesh Cole, but people like that who are really scholars on the topic and know what they're talking about on the history, just spending that time to do that research on the internet is just so important. And I truly believe that so many people should and can do that, and it's just up to them whether they want to do that. So I definitely would love to add on to that and just say, in this day and age with social media and Instagram, definitely just do your research and be ready to kind of question what you see in terms of infographics on Instagram.
All right. So the next question we have is kind of going off of what you both have been saying. What is something people can do to support Kashmiri Hindus, and what are some changes that you'd like to see in cultural and political discourse in the next 5 to 10 years, and why are those changes important? Because I feel like some action is clearly needed. So
yeah, I think this is going to build a lot on my answer and what Meera said previously, because of the fact that just for me, I would start by saying, just for me personally, again, I don't think I'm informed enough to have a particular political opinion. Like I can't really say, oh, do this with this law, or pass this or whatever. I don't really know, and I think that's kind of one of the points I'd actually like to drive home, which is that, again, building on the sort of Instagram infographic story culture, I think so. I forget when, it might have been a year ago or something, there was that Red for Kashmir movement on Instagram where people made their profile pics red, and they were talking about, I think this was in the aftermath of 370 being revoked.
It was. Yeah, there's also an account, Stand with Kashmir, that definitely was promoting that, which I don't know if you know about it, but I can definitely mention it later on about why it was kind of harmful to us. But yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd love for you to mention it later, because I don't really know that much about that one in particular. But just in general, I was starting to see people who, I doubted knew what Kashmir was before this thing happened, right? And the thing is, and I've had my movements and my sways growing up, and trying to, obviously when you're growing up, you tend to try to have hardline opinions on things, and you try to be a rebel at one point, and then you try to be very what's the word, dogmatic at another point, and so which is just natural, and it's part of the process of forming your beliefs in the world, and so there were times when I was very I wouldn't say the word militant, but very harsh thinking, oh, Kashmiri Pandits and what we got to do for us Hindus. And then there were other times when I was on the completely other side of arguing with my parents about how they don't understand the current situation in Kashmir, right? We're not there anymore, but look at what which is cringy phases for me now to look back on, right? But I think that's the whole danger with this activism stuff, is because when your focus, I guess is the way I might put it, is not on the learning, but on the action and the change from the beginning. Change is very, very important. But I've had a lot of experiences in terms of working on different things, my own political activism, where it's this stuff is really, really hard. There are so many different factors. There are so many different information to know, so many different ethical considerations, so many different stakeholders in any given situation, which you have to balance in order to come towards some sort of compromise solution which people like. But when we have this thing where your first exposure to a conflict, or your first exposure to an issue, is this thing is happening, and this is the all-encompassing conclusion you should draw from this conflict, from which all other facts draw their relevancy or their irrelevancy, right? And so the fact of like there being a group of Kashmiri Pandits who were like kicked out, you can ignore that fact because that distracts from the narrative you're trying to push, right? And I'm sure, just to make it fair here, there will be people who are, I guess they call it like Hindutva or like the more Hindu nationalist movement, who will then ignore a lot of, things on the other side of the argument about, potential, breaches of good conduct or, I don't know much about this stuff, but, ways in which the police or army might have been unjust in Kashmir to the people who are there, right? Like just echo chambers. And that's what happens when your first instinct is to be angry about something rather than to learn about it. And so, I think the word Hinduphobia is often thrown around with the Kashmiri Pandit issue in general. And I think it's part of it, but it's also like, I tend to be more forgiving in terms of calling it Hinduphobia because it's more of like ignorance of people who actually don't know that much about the issue. Just being told information which ignores our part of the story, right? Like I feel like, especially now that we're in a political environment where like forgiveness is so important, I'm not going to resort to just calling it Hinduphobia and getting angry about that. But like I guess that's the main takeaway is, and I think Meera knows a lot more about the details of this, so I'll give it to her to talk about maybe specifics and her perspective on this. But like, and I think this is just a general lesson regarding political issues, because that's something else I realized, which was like when I was seeing these people have such firm opinions about Kashmir after just reading these infographics, I thought, there's all these other infographics out there too about other places in the world. And I am even more ignorant about those places. And I'm still being driven to like conclusions about that. So I think it's an important thing to remember across the board, but focus on curious learning of it first before you go towards the normative judgment. And that means that you're not going to be able to act on everything. I think that's a big theme which has emerged now in the sort of this year of Instagram activism culture, which is that like you should be outraged and you should be taking action regarding every single issue politically which is happening out there in the world, which on one hand is very, very good, right? That like we have compassion for things happening all over the place, that we aren't letting people go just because like they're not in our country or not of our ethnicity. But you can't solve every problem. And so like I feel like we need to get back to the idea of choosing the things you care deeply about and then learning deeply and then maybe trying to creep towards making normative decisions. I guess that was kind of a rant. So, Meera.
Well, if that's a rant, then I don't know what's going to happen when I start talking about it. But I definitely agree with a lot that you're saying. I truly feel, even if you don't know the specifics of it, I think what you're mentioning, Ahan, it's very, very important to the whole conversation. As I was kind of mentioning earlier, it comes kind of like as a dual-edged sword, so to speak. One side of it is I think a lot more people know of Kashmir, at least, and that there's something happening there. But on the complete other side of that, they know almost all the wrong things, which is really unfortunate for the people who've been speaking for it and advocating for it for so long. Whenever I talk about Kashmir and just have these like on and on, like one-on-one conversations with other people about it who really just don't know about it, you have to understand that with these kind of Instagram infographics, that's only really been popularized for the past, I'd say, 1 or 2 years, maybe. Before this issue is such a long-running thing that's been going on for history, for time and time and time. It's not like these Instagram infographics are the only platform and this is the one time that we're talking about it because this is the problem, it's going on right now. That's not what it is. If you talk to any Kashmiri person, if it's a Kashmiri Hindu, Kashmiri Sikh, Kashmiri Buddhist, Muslim, whomever, they'll tell you that this history has gone on for a long, long amount of time. I think Ahan kind of started by talking about these timelines where they'll only mention instances that happen not even in the past century, but maybe half century, where they talk about stuff like 1970 or 2000 or now recently. But if you can't even talk about what's the last genocide of hundreds of thousands of Kashmiri Hindus in 1990, if you can't even talk about that, whether it's on an Instagram infographic or going and searching this up in mainstream media, if that's not even talked about, then you're not really getting at the true history and, the context of what Kashmir is. And I think it's so important to have either those conversations or to do that research where if you really want to learn about this topic and get interested in it and talk about it one-on-one, then you have to put in the work to go and look into that and look at the people who are part of this community who are talking about it. With any issue, personally, what I've found is when I'm trying to research into an issue, I don't go and talk to someone who has no clue as well. I don't go and just solely get my information off of one Instagram account that claims to do this sort of activism and do like a post that summarizes the whole issue. What I try to do is I talk to people in the community who I know that they know the context and the history of the problem at hand. When I was doing research into kind of Israel and Palestine, I'm in the Middle East right now. So that's a very hotly contested issue. I really wanted to learn about it. And I talked to people from both communities over just the hurt that both of them have faced and really the history and facts and figures of what's going on there. If a person can't do that for this Kashmiri side of it, if one can't look into it and see, hey, there is such a prominent original community of Kashmiri Pandits who has been dislocated from their culture, from their childhood, from their heritage. And if you can't go and see that those people deserve a platform to speak on about their history and that they have been speaking on it, but it's really just been futile where we've been speaking into the dark and nothing has been really heard, it feels like, until recently when this kind of media situation is surrounding something that's very misinformed and hotly contested over the countries that are involved and then the people who are trying to get involved in the situation. I think overall it's just so important to kind of just speak on that. So I'm just going to try to break it down here. When it comes to Instagram, at least, if we can just take the time, like 30 minutes, an hour, just to go and really research it and just over an extended period of time, reaching out to people who actually are part of those communities. If you're really going to share those kinds of infographics, exactly what Ahan said, don't focus on every issue out there. That's completely unfeasible. Focus on an issue that you are really interested in advocating and, learning about. And once you go and look into that issue, if it's to be this Kashmiri issue, if you really want to go into that advocacy about it, please go reach out to any of us Kashmiri Pandits, reach out to any Kashmiris and learn the perspectives from both sides of the situation. Because I can guarantee you that Kashmiri people, we really do love each other one-on-one. Whoever it is, whether I've met so many Kashmiri Buddhists, Sikhs, even Muslims, who all of us, we truly want to embrace that multiculturalism that we had that was so vibrant. It's just this history that's coming down on us that we really want to push past. And if you really talk to anyone of us in the community, our hearts feel, I know personally as a Kashmiri Pandit, my heart feels so much for what's going on in Kashmir right now and the people of what they're facing. Both Kashmiri Pandits who are being killed there right now, as well as the Kashmiri Muslims who even are facing brutality there. It's such a horrific situation on both sides. And in the end, all Kashmiris want is for us, Kashmiri Pandits and everyone else who was dislocated to return back to our homes. And we want that area to be a safe area where we can go back to that sort of multiculturalism and love. That's truly the heart of what we want, right? And if we can't, at least all we can do at this time is to at least educate you guys and talk to you guys about it. So instead of spreading this kind of misinformation and hate when it comes to this topic, I think it's just so much more important to talk to the people who are part of that community and to learn really what it's about and what you can do at least to help for that situation. And then when it comes to these bigger issues like in the media and stuff like that, the reason why I mentioned my relative Arthi is because she went out and spoke in Congress. She faced a lot of brutal comments when she was there, but she really went and advocated for her cause because that's one of the sole forms of Kashmiri representation we have in media. And in any case, if we can find more of that representation, whatever you guys can do to just help push up people who are really trying to make a difference in our community, our Kashmiri community, that's the thing that's just so helpful for us because we really want to get to that point where we can talk on a big stage about what we've gone through and how our perspectives should really be brought to the stage when we're talking both politically, both in India or even in the US when we're talking about it. But in any case, at any point, this sort of era of misinformation, I think that's the biggest thing that's kind of adds the sort of hardship to it is because of this misinformation. It makes it that much harder for the sort of representation for the community to be there. I think Ahan was mentioning earlier just kind of the red profiles that were set like a year ago, stuff like that, where it's red profile pictures that say like stand for Kashmir. If the idea is to stand for Kashmir and Kashmiri people, then you should stand for all the people in the community, the people who really need that representation. That kind of stuff where some of those accounts, I was mentioning Stand with Kashmir, but some of those accounts that definitely put those red profiles, it ended up harming us Kashmiri Pandits because they don't even talk about the Kashmiri Pandit genocide from 1990, much less the 7 genocides or the 6 genocides that happened before that. And that type of misinformation and lack of information to a mainstream audience, that ends up being more harmful for our community than anything else. So, I mean, if the main message that I personally just want to send is take that time, do your research, talk to people